The smallest gifts are often the ones that expose the biggest emptiness. No one in the grand ballroom expected the evening to be remembered because of a child carrying something worth less than a single dollar. Yet before the orchestra played its final note, hundreds of successful people would stand in complete silence, watching the wealthiest woman in the room quietly wipe away tears she had hidden for years. The annual Whitmore Foundation Charity Gala had become one of the most prestigious events in Chicago, attracting business leaders, philanthropists, celebrities, and journalists from across the country. Crystal chandeliers bathed the ballroom in warm golden light, while servers moved gracefully between tables carrying elegant meals. Expensive gowns shimmered beneath the lights. Tailored tuxedos reflected quiet confidence, and conversations about investments, acquisitions, and charitable donations floated through the room like carefully rehearsed performances. At the center of it all stood Claire Whitmore, the 37-year-old billionaire chief executive officer, whose name had become synonymous with extraordinary success. She accepted another generous donation with a gracious smile, thanked another influential guest, and posed for another photograph. From a distance, she appeared composed, confident, and completely fulfilled, yet the practiced smile on her face never quite reached her blue eyes. A few feet away, standing near the entrance with noticeable uncertainty, Ethan Carter adjusted the sleeves of his navy blazer while looking down at his 8-year-old daughter. Emma held something carefully between both hands, as though it were the most valuable treasure she had ever owned. The tiny braided bracelet had been woven from colorful embroidery thread, each knot tied with patience over several evenings at their small kitchen table. Ethan leaned down and whispered gently, "You don't have to do this if you're nervous." Emma looked up with a smile that carried more courage than many adults ever discovered. "Dad, sometimes people who have everything still need something they can't buy." Ethan chuckled softly before squeezing her shoulder. "Then let's be kind, no matter what happens." They slowly approached the receiving line as conversations continued around them. Some guests glanced toward Ethan's modest suit and Emma's simple dress before politely looking away, assuming they were simply another family invited through the Foundation's community outreach program. No one noticed the little bracelet until Emma reached Claire. The billionaire bent slightly, so she could hear the child above the surrounding conversations. Emma extended both hands and offered the bracelet with complete sincerity. "I made this for you because you looked lonely in the pictures I saw online," she said quietly. "My dad says everybody deserves someone cheering for them." For one suspended moment, the ballroom seemed to lose every sound. Claire stared at the tiny bracelet resting in the little girl's hands. Her fingers hesitated before carefully accepting it, as though it were something incredibly fragile. The colorful threads brushed against her skin, and something deep inside her carefully protected heart suddenly shifted. The smile she had worn all evening disappeared. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes glistened beneath the chandelier light. Without speaking a single word, she closed her hand around the handmade bracelet, while one silent tear escaped despite every effort to stop it. Around them, cameras lowered, conversations faded, and even the orchestra seemed to hesitate, because in a room overflowing with unimaginable wealth, the smallest gift had become the only thing that truly mattered. 2 mornings earlier, long before crystal chandeliers reflected silent tears across a ballroom filled with influence and wealth, the Carter family began their day the same way they always did, with quiet routines that never appeared in newspapers, but carried a kind of richness that could never be measured. The alarm rang at 6 o'clock, and Ethan Carter was already awake before it sounded. He moved carefully through the small house, making sure the floorboards did not creak loudly enough to wake Emma before breakfast was ready. Coffee brewed quietly while scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh strawberries filled the kitchen with comforting aromas. Outside, the window, early sunlight painted soft golden colors across the modest neighborhood as another ordinary Tuesday slowly came to life. Emma wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her sleepy eyes before smiling the moment she saw breakfast waiting on the table. Ethan placed a plate in front of her and smiled. "Big day at school." Emma nodded while reaching for a strawberry. We are making thank you cards for people who help our community. Ethan laughed gently. That sounds more important than anything I've planned today. Emma tilted her head with childlike curiosity. Who helps the helpers? Ethan paused for a moment before answering. Sometimes nobody does. That is why kindness matters even when nobody notices. Emma quietly repeated the sentence to herself as though she wanted to remember every word. After breakfast, they climbed into Ethan's aging pickup truck and drove through familiar streets toward school before heading to the neighborhood auto repair garage where Ethan had worked for more than a decade. The garage was not impressive. Its paint had faded beneath years of changing seasons. The concrete floor carried permanent reminders of countless repairs, and the old radio, resting on a dusty shelf, rarely found a station without static. Yet every customer who walked through the door knew they would be treated with honesty before profit. That reputation had taken years to build, one conversation at a time. Before Ethan had even unlocked the front entrance, an elderly customer was already waiting beside an older sedan with concern written across his face. I think the transmission is gone, the man admitted nervously. Ethan listened carefully before checking the vehicle himself. After several minutes, he smiled reassuringly. The transmission is fine. It is only a loose connection. Give me about 20 minutes. Relief immediately replaced worry. The customer reached for his wallet, but Ethan simply shook his head. You only owe me for the part. I cannot charge you for tightening one connection. The man stared at him in disbelief. Most places would have replaced half the car. Ethan shrugged with an easy smile. Most places are not trying to earn your trust for the next 10 years. Throughout the morning, he repaired vehicles, answered questions patiently, and greeted every customer with the same respect, whether they drove a luxury sport utility vehicle or a 15-year-old compact car. Late that afternoon, Emma arrived after school carrying colored embroidery thread she had received during art class. She sat quietly at a small workbench while Ethan finished replacing a brake assembly. Her little fingers carefully braided strands of blue, white, yellow, and green together, concentrating so deeply that she barely noticed time passing. Ethan finally walked over and smiled. What are you making over there, kiddo? Emma held up the unfinished bracelet. A present. Ethan admired the careful knots. For one of your friends? Emma slowly shook her head. Not yet. I do not know who needs it most. Ethan looked at his daughter for a long moment before softly saying, the funny thing about kindness is that it usually finds the right person before we do. Neither of them realized that those simple words were already leading them toward a moment that would quietly change 3 lives forever. Long after the applause had faded and the last guests quietly left the grand ballroom, Claire Whitmore returned alone to the top floor of the glass tower that overlooked the sleeping city. The elevator doors opened into her private penthouse where polished stone floors, carefully selected artwork, and breathtaking skyline views had impressed countless visitors over the years. Tonight, none of it seemed capable of filling the silence waiting inside. She placed her evening purse on a marble table, slipped off her heels, and stood motionless beside the enormous windows as thousands of city lights flickered below like distant stars. Normally, she would review reports before going to bed, answer messages from executives in different time zones, or prepare for another demanding day. But her thoughts refused to settle. Instead, they kept returning to one unexpected moment. She slowly opened her hand and looked once more at the tiny braided bracelet resting in her palm. The colorful threads were uneven, a few knots sat slightly crooked, and one loose. Strand had been tied twice, where small fingers had clearly corrected a mistake. It was imperfect in every possible way, yet somehow it carried more warmth than every expensive gift she had received that evening. Claire gently traced the bracelet with her fingertips before carefully fastening it around her wrist. The simple touch sent an unexpected wave of emotion through her chest. She quietly closed her eyes, and memories she had not allowed herself to revisit in years slowly returned. She saw a modest kitchen from her childhood where her mother had patiently shown her how to braid pieces of embroidery thread into little bracelets during summer afternoons. Her mother had smiled and said, People remember how you make them feel much longer than they remember what you give them. Claire had been only a little older than Emma when illness suddenly changed everything. Years later, after building one of the country's most successful companies, she had accumulated recognition, influence, and more financial security than she had ever imagined possible. Yet she could not remember the last time anyone had given her something made entirely with love instead of expectation. She quietly walked toward a wooden cabinet tucked inside the study and unlocked the lowest drawer, one she rarely opened. Beneath carefully organized documents rested a small keepsake box covered with a thin layer of dust. Inside lay faded birthday cards, old family photographs, and a worn friendship bracelet her mother had made decades earlier. Claire picked it up carefully. Time had softened the colors, but the pattern looked remarkably similar to the one now resting on her own wrist. She smiled through tears she no longer tried to hide. "You would have loved that, little girl," she whispered into the empty room. Her eyes drifted toward the city once more, but instead of seeing buildings, she remembered the quiet confidence in Ethan Carter's face as he encouraged his daughter without asking for attention or praise. There had been no ambition hidden behind his kindness, no attempt to impress anyone important, only the steady peace of a father raising his child to care about people she did not even know. Claire slowly sat beside the window, leaving untouched the stack of business reports waiting on the table. For the first time in years, quarterly earnings and corporate negotiations seemed strangely unimportant. One question quietly echoed through her thoughts. Who were the people capable of raising a child who believed lonely strangers deserved encouragement? Before the night ended, Claire reached for her phone, searched the foundation guest list, and found one name: Ethan Carter. She looked at it for several silent seconds before placing the phone back on the table. She did not know exactly what she was looking for, but deep inside she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The story behind that tiny bracelet was not finished, and neither, perhaps, was her own. The next morning arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air, but Claire Whitmore found herself driving somewhere she had never expected to visit. Instead of heading toward the towering headquarters where every minute of her schedule had already been planned by assistants, she guided a simple rental sedan through quiet neighborhood streets until the city's polished skyline disappeared behind rows of modest homes and family-owned businesses. She had deliberately chosen ordinary clothes, a light sweater, dark jeans, and comfortable shoes that drew no attention. The handmade bracelet remained fastened around her wrist beneath her sleeve, a quiet reminder of why she had come. After a few more turns, she spotted Carter Auto Repair. The building looked exactly as she remembered from the address listed in the foundation records. The faded sign, the open garage doors, and the familiar sound of air tools blended into the rhythm of honest work. Claire parked across the street for a moment before finally stepping out. Ethan looked up from beneath the hood of a pickup truck and greeted her with the same easy smile he had offered every customer. "Good morning. What can we help you with today?" Claire returned a polite smile while holding out her keys. "I think my car has been making a strange sound." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "We will take a look. It might be something simple." There was no trace of recognition in his voice, no sign that he connected her with the elegant woman from the charity gala. Claire quietly appreciated that. While Ethan examined the vehicle, customers continued arriving one after another. A young mother worried about unexpected repair costs. A retired schoolteacher asked if an older sedan was still safe to drive. A delivery driver needed to return to work before noon. Ethan listened carefully to each concern before explaining every repair in plain language, never exaggerating problems and never suggesting unnecessary work. Claire noticed something even more remarkable than his technical skill. Every person left feeling respected. Late that morning, a man hurried into the garage looking frustrated after another repair shop had quoted him an expensive replacement. Ethan inspected the vehicle, wiped his hands on a clean shop towel, and smiled kindly. "You do not need a new part. One sensor needs cleaning. Give me 15 minutes. The customer stared in disbelief. "That is all." Ethan nodded. Sometimes the right answer is the simple one. A few minutes later, the vehicle was running smoothly again. When the grateful customer asked why the bill was so small, Ethan answered with the same quiet conviction. If I charge people for work they do not need, I lose something more valuable than money. Claire remained silent, watching every interaction unfold naturally. Nothing about Ethan suggested he was trying to impress anyone. He did not know she owned one of the country's largest corporations. He simply treated everyone with equal patience. Around lunchtime, Emma skipped into the garage, carrying her backpack after school. She waved enthusiastically before hugging her father. "Did you have a good morning?" Ethan smiled. "Much better now." Emma noticed Claire sitting nearby and politely walked over. "Is your car feeling better?" Claire laughed softly. "I think it already is." Emma grinned. "Dad says cars are happier when people listen before trying to fix them." Ethan smiled with gentle embarrassment. "I might have said something like that." Claire looked from father to daughter and realized the kindness she had witnessed at the gala had not been a single beautiful moment. It was simply the way they lived every ordinary day. As she prepared to leave, Ethan handed back her keys. "Everything is ready." It was only a loose heat shield. "No charge today." Claire blinked with surprise. "You spent your time on it." Ethan shrugged with an easy smile. Sometimes people need reassurance more than an invoice. Claire thanked him sincerely before returning to her car. As she drove away, she glanced once more at the colorful bracelet on her wrist and quietly admitted something she had not felt in years. For the first time since building an empire, she had met someone whose greatest success could never appear on a balance sheet. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm that none of them had planned. Claire Whitmore found herself inventing small reasons to drive across town whenever her schedule allowed, always arriving in the same simple clothes and the same unassuming rental sedan. Sometimes she claimed she wanted a routine inspection. Other times, she asked Ethan to listen for a sound that had already disappeared. Ethan never questioned her reasons. He simply greeted her with the same warm smile and honest professionalism he offered every customer who walked through the garage doors. One Thursday afternoon, after finishing a quick inspection, Ethan looked toward the small picnic table behind the garage where Emma was arranging paper napkins beside 3 lunchboxes. He smiled apologetically. "We are about to take our lunch break. You have probably got important places to be." Claire glanced toward her watch before quietly shaking her head. "For once, I actually do not." Emma's face brightened immediately. "Then you should eat with us." Claire hesitated for only a second before accepting. The simple wooden table held turkey sandwiches, sliced apples, homemade oatmeal cookies, and a pitcher of fresh lemonade. There were no crystal glasses, expensive table settings, or catered meals, only food prepared with care. Ethan poured lemonade into paper cups and smiled. "It is not fancy, but you are welcome." Claire took a bite of her sandwich and laughed softly. "I cannot remember the last time lunch tasted this peaceful." Emma looked at her with innocent curiosity. "Do you always eat lunch by yourself at work?" The question was asked without judgment, only genuine interest. Claire paused before answering honestly. "Most days I do." Emma frowned thoughtfully. "That sounds lonely." Ethan gently reminded his daughter. "Everybody's life looks different, kiddo." Emma nodded, then smiled at Claire. "You can borrow ours whenever you want." For a moment, Claire could not find any words. She simply smiled and looked down at the colorful bracelet still resting around her wrist. Ethan noticed it for the first time and quietly recognized the familiar pattern. "Emma made that." Claire nodded gently. "I know. It has become very important to me." Emma beamed with pride while Ethan smiled with quiet gratitude. The afternoon passed with easy conversation about school projects, favorite books, old family recipes, and the changing colors of the autumn trees. Nobody mentioned business, wealth, or corporate success. Claire realized hours had passed without thinking about quarterly reports or stock prices. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to enjoy a conversation that expected nothing in return. Before leaving, she offered to pay for the inspection once again, but Ethan simply handed back her keys. "Everything still looks good. There is nothing to charge you for." Claire smiled knowingly. "You really are determined to run the least profitable garage in America." Ethan laughed. "Maybe, but I sleep well at night." As she prepared to drive away, An elderly woman entered the parking lot carrying 2 grocery bags that had split open across the sidewalk. Without hesitation, Ethan walked over to help gather the scattered items, while Emma carefully picked up every apple that had rolled into the grass. Claire quietly joined them without thinking. The woman thanked all 3 of them with grateful eyes before continuing home. Ethan dusted off his hands and simply returned to work as though nothing remarkable had happened. Claire watched him for another moment before climbing into her car. On the drive back toward downtown, she realized something that unsettled and comforted her at the same time. The happiest hour of her entire week had not happened inside a boardroom, an awards ceremony, or aboard a private jet. It had happened at a weathered picnic table behind a small neighborhood garage, where kindness was shared as naturally as homemade lemonade, and where a father and his daughter had quietly reminded her that the richest lives were not always the ones with the largest fortunes. Several weeks passed, and the quiet routine that had brought unexpected peace into Claire Whitmore's life was interrupted by news that arrived without warning. Early one Monday morning, Ethan unlocked the front door of the garage only to find the owner waiting beside a folded document. The older man looked exhausted as he removed his cap and sighed. "I wish this conversation were easier." Ethan accepted the envelope and carefully read the notice. The property had been sold to a commercial developer. Construction would begin in 60 days, and every business on the block would be required to relocate before demolition. Ethan slowly folded the paper and looked around the garage that had become a second home for more than 10 years. Every workbench, every tool, every familiar sound carried memories of countless ordinary days spent helping neighbors keep their lives moving. The owner spoke quietly. "I tried to negotiate more time. I really did." Ethan nodded with understanding. "I know you did." There was disappointment in his eyes, but not bitterness. After a long breath, he smiled gently. "Then we make the best of the time we have left." Word spread through the neighborhood quickly. Customers arrived not only for repairs, but to thank Ethan for years of honesty and dependable service. Some offered suggestions, others recommended different locations, and several insisted he should raise his prices before closing. Ethan simply smiled. "People trusted me before today. I'm not going to change because the calendar did." Emma overheard the conversations after school and quietly sat beside her father on the old wooden bench behind the garage. "Are we going to be all right?" she asked softly. Ethan looked toward the fading afternoon sunlight before answering with calm confidence. "We have each other. Everything else we can figure out one step at a time." Emma slipped her small hand into his and smiled. "Then I am not scared anymore." 2 days later, Claire arrived for another visit and immediately sensed something had changed. The usual easy conversations carried a hint of quiet sadness, and several shelves inside the garage already held neatly packed boxes. She waited until the last customer left before asking, "Is everything all right?" Ethan handed her the property notice without saying a word. Claire read it carefully, then looked back at him. "I'm so sorry." Ethan shrugged gently. "Buildings come and go. Good people do not." Claire studied his face, expecting frustration or anger, but found only acceptance mixed with determination. "Have you thought about what comes next?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Not yet. Right now, I still have customers depending on me." At that very moment, another vehicle pulled into the parking lot with a worried family preparing for a long road trip. Ethan folded the notice, placed it inside a drawer, and walked toward them with the same welcoming smile he had worn every day before receiving the news. Claire watched quietly as he inspected the vehicle, explained the repairs honestly, and even suggested a less expensive solution that would still keep the family safe on the road. He never mentioned that his own future had become uncertain. Driving back to headquarters later that evening, Claire could not stop thinking about what she had witnessed. It would have been easy to write Ethan a personal check, purchase the property, or quietly solve every financial problem in a single afternoon. Yet she knew he would never accept charity disguised as opportunity. He had built his entire life on dignity earned through honest work. If she truly respected the man he was, she needed to honor that principle. As the city skyline appeared ahead, a different idea slowly began to take shape. Whitmore Industries had been discussing a nationwide expansion of its fleet maintenance division for months. Perhaps the greatest act of kindness would not be rescuing one mechanic. Perhaps it would be creating a fair opportunity where integrity, skill, and character could compete on equal ground, allowing the right person to earn a future that no one could ever claim had simply been handed to him. The final weeks at Carter Auto Repair passed with the same steady rhythm that had defined Ethan Carter's entire career. Every morning he unlocked the familiar garage doors before sunrise, greeted customers by name, and focused on the work in front of him instead of the uncertainty waiting beyond the closing date. Inside Whitmore Industries, however, Claire Whitmore had quietly begun putting a very different plan into motion. During a senior leadership meeting, she introduced the long-discussed expansion of the company's nationwide fleet maintenance division. "We need regional operations managers who understand people as well as machines," she explained calmly. "I want every candidate evaluated through a completely independent process. Skills, leadership, integrity, customer satisfaction, and operational judgment will determine every decision. No exceptions." One executive nodded thoughtfully. "Will you be involved in selecting the finalists?" Claire answered without hesitation. "No. Human Resources and the Operations Committee will manage the process from beginning to end. I will only approve the final recommendation after the committee completes its evaluation." Her decision surprised several executives, but everyone agreed that an objective process would strengthen the company's reputation. A week later, advertisements for the new leadership positions appeared across multiple states. The qualifications were demanding. Applicants needed years of technical experience, proven leadership ability, excellent customer service records, and strong recommendations from colleagues and clients. Ethan noticed the posting only because a longtime customer placed a printed copy on the garage counter. "You should apply," the customer said with complete confidence. Ethan smiled politely. "There are probably people with bigger resumes than mine." The customer laughed softly. "Maybe, but I have never met anyone with a better reputation." That evening, Ethan read every requirement carefully. After Emma had finished her homework, he quietly closed the laptop and looked toward his daughter. "I'm not sure I have much of a chance." Emma tilted her head with the same calm wisdom she often carried. "You always tell me that we should try the right thing even when we do not know what will happen." Ethan smiled, realizing his own advice had returned to him. "You remembered that?" Emma grinned. "I remember the important parts." The next morning, Ethan completed the application honestly, listing his years of experience, professional certifications, customer references, and community service without exaggerating a single accomplishment. Several days later, independent evaluators began visiting selected garages without announcing who they represented. They observed daily operations, interviewed customers, reviewed maintenance records, and quietly measured how each applicant handled ordinary challenges. Ethan never suspected the visitors were part of the selection process. He answered every question openly, explained repairs in simple language, and treated each person with the same patience he always had. One evaluator intentionally presented a difficult situation involving an older vehicle that could have generated a costly repair bill. Ethan carefully inspected the problem before smiling. "You only need a small replacement sensor. Replacing the entire system would waste your money." The evaluator nodded silently while writing notes. Another evaluator later asked why customer loyalty remained so high despite the garage's modest appearance. Ethan answered without even looking up from his work. "People forget advertisements. They remember honesty." Weeks passed before the operations committee gathered to compare scores. Technical knowledge, leadership, communication, ethical decision-making, customer satisfaction, and team management were all measured independently. Candidate after candidate was discussed until one file consistently ranked at the top in every category. The committee chair looked around the conference room before speaking. "It appears we have unanimous agreement." Another member smiled while holding Ethan Carter's application. "The numbers support the same conclusion as the interviews." He did not earn the highest ranking because he needed an opportunity. He earned it because he is the strongest candidate. Later that afternoon, an email quietly arrived in Ethan's inbox inviting him to the final interview at Whitmore Industries headquarters. He read it twice before looking toward Emma, who was coloring quietly at the kitchen table. She noticed the expression on his face and smiled before he said a single word. "Something good happened, did it not?" Ethan nodded slowly, still trying to believe what he was reading. "Maybe," he answered with quiet hope. "Maybe a door just opened that we never expected to find." The morning of Ethan Carter's final interview arrived with crisp autumn air and clear blue skies stretching across the city. He stood quietly in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of the same navy blazer he had worn to the charity gala weeks earlier. It was carefully pressed, modest, and slightly older than the suits many executives would wear that day, but it represented something he valued far more than appearances. It represented honesty. Emma walked into the room carrying a small notebook before smiling proudly. "You look like yourself," she said. Ethan laughed softly. "I hope that is enough." Emma nodded with complete confidence. "It always has been." After dropping her off at school, Ethan drove toward Whitmore Industries headquarters, where glass walls reflected the morning sunlight across the downtown skyline. The building seemed impossibly large compared to the neighborhood garage that had shaped most of his adult life, yet he reminded himself of the lesson he had repeated to Emma countless times. Respect every person, fear none of them. Inside the reception area, he was welcomed by a human resources coordinator who escorted him to a conference room overlooking the city. Several members of the Independent Operations Committee entered one by one, introducing themselves warmly before beginning the interview. They asked about leadership, conflict resolution, customer service, technical standards, employee development, and ethical decision-making. Ethan answered every question, honestly, never pretending to know something he did not. When asked how he handled mistakes made by employees, he replied, "People improve faster when they are taught with respect instead of embarrassment." One committee member smiled while taking notes. Another asked what success meant to him. Ethan paused briefly before answering. "If customers trust us, employees feel respected, and everyone goes home knowing they did the right thing, the numbers usually take care of themselves." Nearly an hour later, the interview concluded with sincere handshakes and quiet gratitude. Ethan thanked everyone for the opportunity before leaving the building with no expectation beyond knowing he had given truthful answers. Several days passed before an official phone call invited him to return to headquarters for an announcement regarding the selection process. This time, Emma accompanied him after school, wearing her favorite blue dress and holding her father's hand as they entered the lobby together. In a bright conference room overlooking the city, members of the operations committee greeted them with warm smiles. Claire Whitmore entered only after the committee chair stood and addressed the room. Following an independent evaluation of every applicant, unanimous committee approval, and a comprehensive review of qualifications, we are pleased to appoint Ethan Carter as Regional Maintenance Operations Manager for Whitmore Industries. For a brief moment, Ethan simply stood in silence, absorbing words he had never imagined hearing. Claire stepped forward and offered her hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You earned this opportunity through your integrity, your leadership, and your professionalism. The committee made its decision before I ever reviewed the recommendation." Ethan shook her hand firmly. "Thank you. I will do everything I can to deserve their confidence." As the adults continued speaking, Emma's eyes quietly drifted toward Claire's wrist. Her face immediately brightened with recognition. "You still wear it," she whispered. Claire looked down at the colorful bracelet before smiling with gentle emotion. "Every single day." Emma smiled proudly while Ethan finally noticed it for the first time since the gala. Claire met his eyes and spoke softly enough that only the three of them could hear. "Some gifts remind us not of who we used to be, but of who we still have the chance to become." Ethan looked at the bracelet, then at his daughter, and quietly understood that the smallest act of kindness had traveled farther than either of them had ever imagined. In that peaceful moment, surrounded by glass walls, city skylines, and professional achievements, it was not a promotion, a title, or a successful corporation that mattered most. It was the quiet realization that genuine character had opened a door no amount of wealth alone could ever unlock. Several months passed, and life quietly proved that the strongest transformations rarely arrived with applause. Every morning, Ethan Carter unlocked the doors of Whitmore Industries' Regional Maintenance Center before most of the city had finished its first cup of coffee. Although his office overlooked a modern facility equipped with advanced technology, he still walked through the service bays, greeting technicians by name, asking about their families, and listening before giving instructions. New employees quickly noticed something unusual about their manager. He never measured success only by efficiency reports or production numbers. He celebrated honesty, teamwork, and respect with the same enthusiasm that others reserve for financial results. Whenever a difficult repair challenged the team, Ethan reminded them, "People trust us with more than their vehicles. They trust us with their peace of mind." Those words gradually became part of the culture throughout the entire operation. Meanwhile, Claire Whitmore found herself making different decisions as the months unfolded. Executive meetings still focused on strategy and growth, but she now asked questions she had rarely considered before. How would each decision affect employees' families? Would customers feel respected as well as satisfied? Could success be measured by character as confidently as profit? Senior executives quietly noticed the change. The company remained ambitious, but its leadership had become more compassionate. Claire never spoke publicly about the reason behind that transformation. She simply carried a small handmade bracelet beneath the cuff of every elegant business suit she wore, allowing it to remind her each morning that genuine leadership always began with remembering the humanity of others. Emma adjusted beautifully to the new season of life as well. She loved visiting the maintenance center after school, where technicians greeted her with cheerful smiles and occasionally let her organize harmless tool trays or help decorate the employee break room before holidays. One afternoon, she looked around the busy facility and whispered to her father, "Everybody smiles here." Ethan looked across the room before answering softly, "People work differently when they know they matter." On a cool Saturday afternoon, near the end of autumn, Claire invited Ethan and Emma to walk beside a quiet lake inside one of the city's oldest public parks. Golden leaves drifted gently across the walking path while sunlight reflected across calm water with peaceful warmth. There were no reporters, photographers, or business meetings waiting for them. Only 3 people enjoying an ordinary afternoon together. Emma skipped ahead, collecting colorful leaves, while Ethan and Claire followed at an easy pace. After several minutes, Emma turned around and smiled. "Can I ask you something?" Claire nodded warmly. "Of course." Emma pointed toward the familiar bracelet still resting on Claire's wrist. "Do you think it is getting old?" Claire looked down at the slightly faded threads and smiled with quiet gratitude. "Maybe, but some things become more beautiful because they stay with us." Ethan watched his daughter grin with quiet pride before looking toward the peaceful lake stretching beneath the autumn sky. None of them spoke for a while. They did not need to. The silence itself carried everything words could not explain. Claire finally broke the quiet with a gentle smile. "I spent years believing that success meant reaching higher than everyone else. Your family reminded me that the better goal is reaching farther toward other people." Ethan shook his head humbly. "We only tried to live the way we thought was right." Claire smiled once more. Sometimes that is exactly what changes the world. As the afternoon sun settled lower across the water, the 3 of them continued walking together without hurry, leaving only quiet footprints behind. The city continued rushing toward tomorrow. Businesses continued competing, and fortunes continued rising and falling. Yet one simple truth remained untouched by all of it. Money could build remarkable buildings, influence could open impressive doors, and success could earn admiration, but only kindness freely given could quietly heal a lonely heart. And sometimes the smallest gift, offered with nothing except sincerity, became the beginning of a second chance that no amount of wealth could ever purchase.